Hi, I'm Jay Wong, Director of the USC Center on Public Diplomacy. Happy New Year, everyone. It's great to welcome you to our LinkedIn Live event. Today's program explores the growing phenomena called creator culture, where individuals actively engage in creating and sharing content through digital platforms. And we're particularly interested in how this disruption shapes storytelling formats and youth engagement in public diplomacy. And I'm very delighted to welcome to our program my colleague, David Craig, who is a pioneer in the field of creator cultures and the rise of global creator sectors. And David is a clinical professor at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism and director of the dual degree MA program in Global Media and Communication, a joint effort between USC Annenberg and the London School of Economics. He's the author of several books, including the latest book, Apocalypse Television, that describes the making of and the fallout from the television movie The Day After that helped to shape and end the Cold War. And it's a fascinating topic. Actually, the book, I haven't had a chance to read it. So welcome, David. And we'll start with David's presentation. And please share your comments and questions anytime and during the program. And after David's opening comments and presentation, that we will turn to discussion and questions from all of you. So thank you. So David.
Thanks so much, Jay. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to thank the team also for helping set up all of the talk and the technology here. Bear with us here in case we have any technological glitches. So I'm going to talk a little bit about creator culture and how it ties in with public diplomacy. A little bit of a background, as Jay mentioned, is that I've published or co-authored and co-edited 3 books on this topic. I've been doing this research for the last 10 years. I'm a clinical professor here, but I just spent the fall at Harvard as a visiting scholar in the Berkman Klein Center and the Institute for Rebooting Social Media, and I am presently a global Fulbright scholar, which I will discuss a little bit as well. All right, so my research started over 10 years ago when we were looking at the contestations that were occurring between the hordes from Silicon Valley and the survivors of a century's worth of mass communication in the legacy media industries, which we typically think of as Hollywood. These contestations have only become more accelerated and exacerbated and more severe. And this research that I began looking at was the battles that were emerging over media industries and whether or not the rise of YouTube and these producers we referred to at the time as YouTubers represented the next iteration of Hollywood, and if they didn't, what else? What else could they possibly describe? And over the course of 300 interviews in 25 cities in 10 countries over 2 years, my co-author and I came to some conclusions. The conclusion is that this was not the next iteration of Hollywood, rather this comprised something new, something different, something quite significant from the way in which the media industries, as we typically understand them, film, TV, music, and publishing, have operated over the years. The first and most important distinction was some clarity. Clarity around the difference between streaming media services, whether it's video or audio, and social media platforms. These are important distinctions that we found vital to our research. The fact is that streaming media platforms have in many ways represent the next iteration of Hollywood, new forms of distribution models with some new technologies, but for the most part contained, closed systems in which media copyright and intellectual property is sold, produced, licensed, and distributed and seen and exhibited. Social media platforms, however, refers to a whole raft of technologies, in many instances unfairly lumped together for their social media affordances, but still vitally distinctive by the fact that these were open systems in which you could post content yourself. The next question that we were raising around this issue was the emergence of these entrepreneurs off of these platforms, off of social media platforms. See if we can get this slide to go. Hang on. May take 2 tabs. This, if you can see the slide, is just a reflection of the emergence of these new cultural producers, these entrepreneurs who had developed an expertise at harnessing these social media platforms in ways that appeared similar to the way in which film and television has operated, but once we took a much more closer look at their labor, their practices, their management, and their entrepreneurialism, we found some really important, vital distinctions. Let's see if we can't pull up the next slide here. And the animation, of course, slows things down, I think, on LinkedIn. So what are creators? We use the term now almost very generously, and in fact, everyone in Hollywood refers to themselves as creators. Creators are, from our vantage point, social media entrepreneurs. They do something quite distinct from Hollywood creators in the sense that they harness platforms first and foremost to build online communities from which they can derive both economic and cultural value. These are really critical distinctions from what we understand Hollywood creators to be, or Hollywood producers, whether we're talking about streamers, networks, executive producers, or showrunners, screenwriters, directors, or actors. The creators in social media are harnessing these platforms in order to build communities of interest to share their values, their identities, their ideologies. They have the ability to reach global communities of interest out there, and then convert that interest, that engagement, those communities into a dozen different business models and revenue streams. What I want to preface here is that creators in Hollywood operate quite distinctly. And the best way to differentiate them is Hollywood creators are involved in the distribution, production, and exhibition of copyright or intellectual property. Whether they are making films or television, producing music, or writing books. These are important distinctions from what the social media creators that we were studying were looking at. So as you can see on the slide, social media creators, as we use the term more generously, refers specifically to people native to social media developing these communities of interest that they're able to monetize. In fact, as a provocation, and I'll come back to this, is that one other way to define what creators are is for-profit online community organizers. And this will come into play when I talk a little bit about the research that I did at Harvard over the last 6 months. So to differentiate again, creators are not the same as Hollywood producers or Hollywood creators by virtue of not being involved in the generation of copyright or intellectual property. So let's talk about the value of creators. As I mentioned, creators have the capacity to build online communities and generate revenue from them. How do we understand the economic value of creators? Well, it turns out that is both science and art. And that's always been the case even in the media industries, is understanding the actual value of the intellectual property that media industries generate is itself a bit more mythological and magical and mystical than we know. Nielsen ratings, for example, have only been a suggestion of what the value is of the media content that has been generated in Hollywood. Likewise in social media. Understanding and mapping the scale and value and worth of creators and the entire creator economy has proven extremely challenging. It's limited by the fact that platforms themselves don't necessarily give us all the data, that all these creators operate across multiple platforms. All of these creators are engaged in very different types of community organizing. They are also using many diverse business models, and examples would be influencer marketing, subscription fees, licensing, social commerce, virtual goods. And so to try to map the size and scale of this creator economy is quite challenging. But I'll give you one example of the creator that most people familiar with the creator economy would know, and perhaps most of the audience today. You've all heard of Jimmy Donaldson, known as Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast is 24, maybe 25 years old now, and he has a estimated net worth of $1.5 billion. He has launched not only numerous ventures, but it all stems from his ability to create a community of over 200 million subscribers just on YouTube alone, although he does, like every creator, operate across multiple platforms. The value of this creator economy is estimated somewhere between 20 billion and half a trillion. This is another reflection of the fact that creator economics or economists are struggling to really assess the full and truest value of what these creators bring. And in speaking to a number of these economists, I was reminded that most economics is dependent upon making heroic assumptions about the value of any industry out there. So with great variance, one has to wonder whether this is in fact a enormously valuable industry that is the size of most GDPs out there in the world, or if in fact it's a nascent industry that could be ever nascent, that may go away. We don't know. But in the course of 10 years, the more I have conducted this research, the more this industry seems to have grown both in stature and value and size. But what I want to highlight for us today is that these are not just entrepreneurs. These are cultural entrepreneurs. These are people who have the capacity not only to generate tremendous amounts of revenue, but also to have a huge social, cultural, and political influence on their communities. And we have tremendous evidence, tragically, sadly, of toxic creator culture. Since creator culture arrived, there have been those who have used this medium and this technology in order to engage in nefarious, bad behavior for which they've not been held accountable. And that includes replicating a lot of the same power relations that we have out in society, in many ways amplified and accelerated and more advanced. But less well observed or discussed is the fact that there's an infinitely much broader account of creator culture that I've been interested in mapping and understanding. When I first started this research, it became clear that the leading creators in the first wave of creator culture came from the margins. In particular, Asian Americans were the most prominent and successful. They defined creator culture for the first decade of this industry. Queer creators, particularly intersectional queer creators from many diverse identities and overlapping identities, continued to do very well and thrive in creator culture space and succeed both in terms of their ability to profit from their communities, but also advocate on behalf of their community. And in many ways, they become exemplars or representative of the advance of different social movements and causes. But the other types of advocacy work that I'll talk about is the fact that both the Obama and the Biden White House have understood the importance of creators, brought them in to meet, to promote healthcare, to promote awareness about why the U.S. has been involved in the Ukraine war. But beyond political advocacy, the work that I did at Harvard as a visiting scholar this fall was looking at this phenomenon of creators for change. Initially, it was a term that was used to describe a YouTube program in which the company began to sponsor and promote creators involved in social advocacy work, particularly around fighting extremism and disinformation out in the Middle East and Southeast Asia and in other markets. But as I began conducting this research, it became clear that this was the tip of the iceberg. This sort of advocacy work, and in many ways, public diplomacy that these creators are doing dovetail with a lot of other interests out there. So while I was at Harvard, I spoke with and met with the Center for Public Health at the Harvard Chan School, who are already engaged in a very rigorous creator program to recruit creators who were pushing out healthcare messages and were actually doing advocacy work around legal policy changes in healthcare. And I continued this work. The leftovers from the Creator for Change program at YouTube wound up also being strategies the UNDP has used in Southeast Asia. And the UNDP has now entered into partnerships with other platforms like TikTok and Meta around recruiting creators who are already engaged in that sort of advocacy work and public diplomacy. Other CSOs, NGOs, USAID, Save the Children have all had a varying strategic approach to working with creators. That's because it's well understood by a lot of these organizations that in order to reach their constituency, to promote their programming, or to fund their projects, they need to be in partnership with creators. The twist in this narrative that I want to just add before I close is I've not only looked at, my colleagues and I have not only looked at global creator culture, but we've also been studying China's creator culture, which is referred to as Wanghong. And as you can see in the center of the book that we wrote 2 years ago was about China's Wanghong culture. This anticipated, of course, the rise of ByteDance, Douyin, TikTok, and the response from outside of China to what is the perception or the threat, if you will, of China's creator culture going out, but also their technology leapfrogging over the West in terms of their platforms and creating the conditions for what I refer to as platform nationalism, which is actually a project that I will be conducting research about in the Global South over the next 18 months. So on that note, I just want to leave you with one final thought, which is that in case it sounded like I was describing something in the distant future, 2 years ago, Microsoft Research did some hefty research and consideration of this concept of creator culture and concluded that we already live in the era of creator culture because creator culture now reflects the social, economic, and organizational logic that increasingly typifies how people express themselves, work together, and foster relationships. And on that note, I'll put my presentation down and turn to Jay.
Thank you so much, David. This is a great overview of the phenomena. And to our audience, please share your comments and questions. And so, David, you mentioned sort of the role of community plays in sort of this process. Can you say a little bit more about in what ways that the community process helps these creators to build and to maintain a loyal following?
Absolutely.
And how is that loyalty maybe different from like the traditional, the kind of the followers of our traditional stars and all
Right.
that? Yeah.
Right, so there's some important critical distinctions between viewers, audiences, readers, listeners, or even fans, although there is some considerable blurring of the line. The difference is that when you are, and I was a Hollywood producer for 25 years, when you're producing content for audiences, you're not expecting that audience is going to turn around and produce content back. That you're not speaking to people who are also in the content business as you are. In the context of creators don't see their community as fans or audiences. In fact, they rarely even use the term community. They would come up with their own terms to describe the unique relationship that they have between their ideas and their identities and interests and these communities. The scholar Nancy Bain referred to this in the context of relational labor. I like to think of it as relational management. And that has a lot to do with the fact that these are not one-to-many mass communication models. This is networked social communication technologies. So it's not just simply that they're pushing out content. They're using content as a means to engage a community, to get them to like, to share, subscribe. If you ever watch or spend much time with any creator on any platform, that's the coin of the realm. It isn't just simply that they are seen, it's that they are engaged with their community, that they are looking at and responding to comments. There's a lot of invisible labor that we don't witness because of the technology itself around the way in which creators are always interacting with their community in various ways, maybe not on the same platform. Sometimes they're over on Discord, or they're doing a special live streaming session, or they're over on LinkedIn now. LinkedIn has a very rigorous creator program. And that is, in many ways, they understand that they have to continue to nurture the relationship between the creators and their community. Very important distinction from the relationship that I would say that most celebrities have with their audience. The closest may be the Taylor Swifts and the Swifties of the world, right? The fandom there. But even then, I don't think most Swifties are likely to get a response from Taylor directly on their social media.
So how do they strike a balance between like authenticity and perhaps the persona, they sort of develop over time with their followers? And you mentioned a couple of examples of, how their work and the network can be leveraged into promoting public health. In our cases, how do we promote cultural relations and public engagement, youth engagement, all of that. So how do they do that? I mean, because on the one hand, they need to create engaging, entertaining content, but at the same time, when they are venturing into these other realms, and so the question of being authentic, but also being, right, it's like a fit with the persona. That
Right.
they have developed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, I'm gonna pull rank here and quote Shakespeare and say that all the world's a stage.
It's a stage.
We're performing character personas ourselves right now on camera, and we will off camera. All of us are doing it. A lot of people. I had a neighbor tell me just this week that her motto is that no one knows anyone else's story because most of us don't know our own story. We're all engaged in some form of performance in our lives, whether it's even with our most intimate partners. The issue here isn't that these are completely authentic people who are appearing in this role, but rather that they are more authentic than what we've understood from 100 years of celebrity. That they seem to have the ability to harness these platforms to at least represent some form of intimacy, authenticity, sincerity, generosity. So there have been numerous instances, for example, where creators have been found out to be inauthentic. That the persona that they have conjured on camera turns out to be not the one that is seen off camera, and the minute that is revealed, their community dissipates. It causes epic collapses of their entire business model because they've manifest a persona that is not aligned with who they are. One of the biggest challenges that we know with creator culture is that they are often young people who are going through themselves enormous identity formation, going through enormous changes in terms of who they even understand themselves to be. And there are these ruptures that occur when they suddenly have to admit to their community, I need to move on. There are new interests in my life. I'm no longer PewDiePie, the bad boy of creator culture who's now causing spectacular disruption and some really nefarious, unaccountable activity. I'm now PewDiePie, the married man who's raising a child in Japan and now wants to engage with a community that cares about a different set of things. Those ruptures are a great indication of the way in which these developments between creators and communities and relationships are so difficult for them to maintain. It can be very precarious, but it's also the coin of the realm. It's the way in which they also get their communities to support them. This is still creative work. This is labor. There is time, energy, and an enormous amount of skill that goes into this work. It doesn't appear that way on camera or through images, but it is an exhausting kind of career, and for them to maintain that sort of work is a real challenge. This pertains to the work of public diplomacy and public health because the unique dynamic at play here is that you can no longer just simply go to a creator as you would a celebrity and say, here's a script, here's the message, here's what we need you to say or do. If it is not something that is rooted in the dynamics of that relationship the creator has with the community, the creator will not do it, but more importantly, the message will not be received by the community. The community is going to be confused why someone that they hang out with on Twitch playing World of Warcraft for 8 hours a day suddenly in the middle of it starts talking about environmental change or sustainability. Unless the creator has found a way to craft that message within the framework and the dynamics of that relationship they've built with their community.
So is there like a standard process in terms of for like other sectors, right, to kind of to form these collaborative relationships with the creators, or is it's just very organic kind of it happens when it happens?
Great question. That turns out to be the crux of the research I was looking at this past fall. Is I wanted to better understand how these organizations are engaging with creators, and what I discovered is that they all are testing out different strategies. So what they've all quickly understood is that, again, the old pattern of hiring sponsors or celebrities to go out and deliver a message or to represent their interests doesn't fly with these creators. But they're all negotiating and navigating different strategies. So some of them hire creators or partner with creators, I should say is a better term, around a particular campaign, a particular cause. Sometimes it's grassroots politics, sometimes it's local, sometimes it's a global sort of thing. Other organizations are only working with creators around fundraising. So they're not involved in the actual programmatic work of the organization. They're more involved in helping to fund the programmatic work. And then there are other intermediary firms that started to pop up in my research that were entering into longer term relationships with creators where they could build out a more complicated kind of relationship with the creators around many different topics. So they had creators basically under a kind of a sponsorship model. To be honest, I think it's not one size fits all in terms of these strategies, and so all these NGOs and CSOs are all going to continue to experiment, and I think it's probably going to be a mix of different strategies for some time.
Oh. Here's a question: how global? You already talked about some of the global examples, but just say a little bit more about how global is this phenomenon?
Right. So the surprise for us in our research was that the U.S. and even the global north represents only a very small percentage of this breadth and scale of creator culture. Creator culture could be found throughout the planet, obviously. The example I would give is in China specifically. In China, there's been a state top-down model for trying to get everyone to become a creator, including the most rural of citizens. So pig farmers and agrarian folk and factory workers were being encouraged to go online, build community, and find ways to commercialize their community on those platforms where they have even more sophisticated and advanced technology. But we found creators in every niche corner market of the planet, and they all have slight variations, in many ways representative of the social dynamics of the community that they're speaking to, while at the same time operating across platforms that are transnational and in many ways borderless. So it's kind of spectacular, the breadth and scale of creator culture that emerged almost seemingly overnight, although in fairness, this started around 2006, so we're coming up on almost 20 years of global creator culture. The research I'm also interested in lately is the fact that there is no singular global creator culture, or even transnational global creator culture. They all are still marked by local, regional dynamics, including underlying policy initiatives. So in this concept of platform nationalism that I'll be doing with the Fulbright Project is to look more carefully at the emergence of local, global creator cultures, and that includes creator cultures that are both emerging off of the Western platforms and also off of Chinese platforms.
So we only have a few seconds left, but I wanted to ask, what do you foresee as the future trends of creator culture?
The future trends of creator culture, obviously, like every other technology, there's a lot of disruption happening around generative AI. I just held a workshop with Microsoft on generative AI and creator culture. There are a lot of promise and peril in that concept, and the question will be whether or not platforms are going to use generative AI to create their own creators, and at the expense of the creators that they've helped nurture and grow, and that have helped the platforms themselves grow. The other future of creator culture lies in regulation. I'm hoping to do some work around creator rights. The fact is that for the moment, most countries, even in the West, have little recognition of the tremendous economic and cultural value of creators, and therefore have not introduced regulation and policy to help protect them as well as keep them accountable.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks to our audience. So that's all the time we have. It's just a fascinating, exciting development, and we'll continue this discussion with David. Actually, David also teaches in our professional education programs, looking at creator culture, what that means for public diplomacy, youth engagement. So we look forward to having more discussions on this topic. So thank you so much for joining us today. Bye.